Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third set of sessions with the title this time, Global Learning for All, Educating for a Sustainable Future. My name is Jonas Hertler. I'm based in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm joining you today from the UN Institute for Training and Research, and I'm delighted to be the moderator for today's session. We have a growing number of participants, great, close to 30, now over 30 individuals. So we will get started right away. We have an exciting program in front of us. Just two housekeeping technical issues. If you have been in previous sessions, you will have seen that before. Please, first of all attendees are in listen-only mode, but of course we want to hear from you. So please, one, use the chat function, which should be somewhere on the right-hand side of your panel throughout the meeting for any questions, comments, suggestions you have. I'm also joined by Jen McCauley, the Assistant Director at the SUNY Center for Collaborative Online International Learning, who will help me to monitor this chat. And just to get us started, maybe if all attendees, you just want to type in where you are joining us from today, that would be great to hear. And then secondly, you have the Q&A function on the right-hand side. So if you have any questions to our distinguished panelists, please use the Q&A function, and we hope to address all the questions that you have. Today's session will feature three panelists, and I will introduce them in just a second. And we will focus on SUNY's, that's the State University of New York's groundbreaking efforts to holistically integrate the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, into its core activities of education, scholarship, operation, and community engagement. We will learn how, by building and fostering a culture of global responsibility through curricular, co-curricular, and leadership efforts, SUNY is working to evolve the global citizenship competencies of its students while increasing the positive impact that its community of more than 500,000 students, faculty, and staff can have to advance these sustainable development goals. So without further delay, let me introduce you the three panelists you will hear from today. That's not in the order that they will speak, because we have a very interactive session format. But first, Dr. Kristen Esterberg, the president of the SUNY Potsdam campus in upstate New York. Then secondly, Todd Larson, the provost and senior vice chancellor of the SUNY System Administration. And then last but not least, Ryan McPherson, the chief sustainability officer at the University of Buffalo. So we plan to make today's meeting as active and interactive as possible. So let me now hand over to Ryan for a quick exercise to get us started. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Jonas. So just to start, we thought we'd have a little bit of fun and do a quick poll here. So if we could bring that up, be great. So if you could all submit your answers as soon as that comes onto the screen. Ted, are you able to share that with us at this point?
It's active right now.
Okay, super, thank you. So what is the dominant emotion one needs to implement the SDGs across an entire system during a pandemic? You have your choices here. We thought we'd have a little bit of fun with this, considering all the challenges that we're facing this year. So we can't see it as presenters, but I hope you're all able to see those options that are up there. Fear, hope, resilience, learned helplessness, or pathological optimism. We can, and once you have a number that you think is close to full, if you could close that out, show that would be great. Ted, you're going to have to let us know what we have for numbers on those,
sure,
how that comes out.
Sure. Right now, resilience is the lead at 55%. There's 22 votes. I don't see any more votes, so I'll go ahead and end the poll. Oh, wait a minute. Great. There's more votes coming in. Okay, 24 votes, 25 votes.
That's great. Why don't we close it out there?
Okay.
And what do our results look like?
Fear, 0%, hope, 12%, resilience, 58%, learned helplessness, 0%, and pathological optimism, 30%.
Well, I'm really glad to see that fear and learned helplessness are low on the list, so congratulations. We passed the first poll. That makes me feel a lot better considering the challenges that we have out there. Awesome. Let's go to the next one. So the next question that we have for you is, what key motivating factor will most likely quickly advance the SDG integration across, in our case, an entire system? So a little bit of tongue in cheek here, first option, state financial crisis or national financial crisis, if that pertains to you. Executive leadership transition. We just had a leadership transition here at SUNY. Reopening campuses during a global pandemic, or major SDG challenges that we face globally right now, whether that's Western fires, hurricanes, social unrest, etc. So make your choices there. Which one will help us the most here? Yeah, a couple. And then Ted, if you want to close that out and then just announce what the breakdown is from those, that'd be great.
Okay. We're at 15. A lot more votes coming in. Should I wait?
We'll give them another 10 seconds here. Super. In the interest of time, why don't we close it out now and see what our audience is thinking.
Okay, the poll is closed. State financial, 3%. Executive leadership, 19%. Reopening campuses, 10%. Major SDG challenges, 68%.
We have a big winner there, so that's clear what's going on nationally. Excellent. And our last question, just to see how people are doing this morning, is this is a softball one, but we'll ask it anyway. Which of the following United States sectors do you think is best poised for success in advancing the SDGs? And we're asking you not to be biased in this question. So our options here are business, the business sector, cities and towns, if you will, states or provinces, higher education, and then just for fun, we'll throw in Washington, D.C. as the final choice. Give you 15 seconds to do that. Why don't we close that up? Ted, if you can announce that when you have it, that'd be great.
Okay, 21 votes, and we have business 14%, cities 19%, states 5%, higher education 62%, and DC 0%.
Well, the last one on DC was not surprising to me. Higher ed as well, leading the way. So that's a great segue for us to move in here. And I'm just so happy to be on a panel with both Kristen and Todd today. And Provost Larson, please.
So thank you very much, Ryan. And it's really a pleasure to be with everybody. And I guess I am a little bit relieved that higher education came out fairly well in that last poll. That is very much what we're here to talk about today, is at least one system's approach to this. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, as was mentioned earlier, SUNY is the larger of two systems of public higher education in New York State, the other being the City University of New York. We serve SUNY about 400,000 degree-seeking students on 64 campuses, and probably the thing to know there is that we're comprehensive in scope. So we include community colleges, research universities, university medical centers, and really just about everything in between. So quite a diverse, quite a large system. I can really thank the UGC, or the University Global Coalition, for SUNY's engagement with the SDGs, at least as part of the initial condition for this. It was my good fortune to meet Ryan fairly early on in my tenure as provost, actually in another context. So it was definitely in the back of my mind. But when Georgia Tech President Angel Cabrera was organizing the founding meeting for UGC, he invited Sally Crimmins-Villela, who's our senior international officer for the system. And when she came back, she talked about this in a way that it really sounded like something we wanted to explore and be serious about. And I started to connect the dots a little bit with the sustainability network that exists within SUNY, and that that Ryan is very active in and may talk about a little bit later. But at the system level, we did get a little bit stuck on this idea of adding one more initiative. We felt like this was an area where we wanted to play. We felt like it was a very important set of values that it would impart to our students and the learning experiences we wanted to provide for them. But just on a practical matter, I think I was overseeing 7 or 8 task forces on the system level on a number of different things already that semester. The thing that kind of saved us, though, in thinking about this is this really wasn't one more thing. It was everything. It seemed to pervade all of these other strategic issues that we were encountering as a system. And we may talk about that a little bit, too, as we get a little bit further into the weeds on this. So there really was an opportunity here to engage global education and the SDGs in a pretty comprehensive way. And for SUNY, this why is really the critical part. You know, like all of you, I think that why and looking ahead to what the needs of our students and our stakeholders are going to be is really the important area for us to stay focused on. And it's where the work often gets difficult. So there were really a few primary drivers I wanted to mention for why we're engaged in this work in general. We started by recognizing the need to really remake our approach to global education and really making sure that equity was a very strong feature of the way in which that was done. Secondly, we felt like we needed to be authentic with our own operations and way of doing business and to match our SDG values with administrative practices both on the system level and on campuses. Obviously, it's not enough to expect solutions from students and faculty. We also need to advance them and promote them in the way we do our work at the system level. We wanted to, third, increase the number of students who are empowered to become global and sustainability-minded change agents that could advance these SDG solutions and propose new ones. And finally, we wanted to leverage meaning and purpose in this work for everybody involved, for students, faculty, and staff. So we're going to start by sharing our ongoing and developing story with what this system-wide task force has been working on, a global learning framework that we're reviewing our current activities and then kind of looking ahead at what our chances may be as a system. And you're going to see very quickly how the SDG framework features prominently in the way we're organizing that work. Kristen's also going to jump in here pretty soon after Ryan's introduction of the SDG framework. And Kristen's going to jump in and talk a little bit about how we're building new ways to leverage these SDGs in hands-on experiences that are creating student change agents and improving people's lives across the globe through our COIL work in particular, just as an example of the way that this can be put into practice. We do want to focus on extending the benefits of global education. I mentioned equity earlier in connection with global education, but student mobility, if you just sort of take a little bit of an antiquated view of what global engagement looks like, perhaps, is only able to engage about 10% of our student population across SUNY. And half of our enrollment is in the community college sector, where this participation rate is even lower. It's less than 2%. So if we want to be equitable, we really have to think about other modes of doing this. And this COIL framework that we'll talk about is really a clever way of facilitating that engagement. So Ryan, I think if we can bring up the slides, the first slide here is just this little bit of a description, if you like, of this task force, and Kristen's going to speak in a moment to how we're going about the work that's happening there. We're seeking ways to incorporate meaningful global learning experiences into the heart of what we do as a system. And if we advance to the second slide, obviously, and the colors and the categories of this slide I think are well known to everybody. We were led fairly naturally to a focus on the SDGs, which really provide essential content for creating next generation of globally minded leaders and change agents to enact SDGs. We have some fortunate coincidences. As I mentioned earlier, we have all of these task force running at the same time. This global learning for all process that I've described does coincide with an overhaul we're looking at as a system of our general education requirements. So it really is ideal timing for redefining global perspectives through that activity, and those two groups are working closely together. And then obviously I've mentioned the connection between SDGs and global learning. So as many of you might recognize, the first important step in kind of carrying this forward was to get great allies to help you do it. And my good fortune was to find fairly early on that President Kristen Esterberg, who's on the call with us today, as well as our colleague Doug Neiman, who is the provost at Binghamton University, were willing to sign on and sort of be the co-facilitators of the system-wide task force. My good fortune with Kristen in particular is that when she heard me talking about GLFA, she immediately stepped up and volunteered. So I really didn't have to twist her arm too much to help lead this. And I think I'm going to let her at this point expand a little bit more on the process we're going through with that work.
Thank you, Todd. And I will say that this task force, Global Learning for All, has just been one of the most extraordinarily creative and productive task forces that I've had the good fortune to work on. I want to talk a little bit about our structure. Provost Larson mentioned that I had a very wonderful, still do have a wonderful co-leader in the provost from Binghamton. But what we found was that we could bring together representatives throughout the SUNY system, presidents, provosts, faculty, students, and professionals from a variety of areas, both sustainability and international education. So we brought together some folks who hadn't been in the same room before. We met face-to-face as a full task force for the first time in December, and then once again in January, fully intending to meet one last time in April and complete our work in June. And then, of course, as you well know, COVID happened. But before COVID happened, we were able to form committees that really reflected our priorities. One was, as the title of our task force says, Global Learning for All, we knew that we needed to reach the entire SUNY student population, not just the small proportion that were able to engage in student mobility. We also wanted to talk about sustainability in global learning, faculty engagement, assessment. And so we were beginning to formulate our recommendations. And Brian, maybe you can go to the next slide for us, please. There, we were just beginning to formulate our recommendations when COVID came along. And we had to put the task force itself on pause after March 15th. But what we found was this also gave us the opportunity to transform our vision into action, and relatively quickly. So we wanted to take the ideas that we were building for Global Learning for All and then figure out how to make progress in our new reality. And there really are two ways that the global learning goals have gained traction in SUNY. First, how we frame out the SDGs in our own universities, and Ryan's going to talk about that in just a moment. And then second was a pilot program for addressing the needs of students whose study abroad plans were interrupted. And I'm going to come back and talk about this more in a bit. So Ryan, why don't I hand it over to you now?
Great, thanks, Kristen. I appreciate that. So I was incredibly lucky in this, that the charge that Todd had given my colleague Peter and I was basically, how do we integrate the SDGs across our teaching, our research, our operations, and of course our engagement. And so to achieve this, we, like anything in life, we had a great team. And as you can see, some of the members who are listed on this slide across the system, representing really a diverse array of colleagues from both university centers, community college, state operational teaching colleges, et cetera. And it was one of these groups that I don't want to say you love going to every Zoom meeting in your life, but this one I really looked forward to. It was a great engagement session with colleagues where we were really trying to stretch, if you will. We came up with a three-pronged strategy, and this is really the kind of bones of the approach of the work. So the first one was to think about the SDGs themselves, keeping those goals, but thinking about new draft targets under them that would apply to our system of higher education, both the SUNY system and the campuses, and delineating what those are. The second part was really thinking of a way of how we could really ground that and the best practices that were already occurring on some of those new targets and sub-goals across the system. So showing those case studies to really build credibility and build momentum. And then the third part was, with any planning process, we had to figure out how to actually operationalize this and, well, I guess to make it sustainable, if you will, and really move forward over a longer period of time and gain traction. So we set off and, we were building off of some previous work that had already been done, as Provost Larson mentioned, by my colleagues across the system, sustainability coordinators, directors, et cetera, who are listed on this slide and many more. And like anything, sometimes timing is everything. And I think having this great work that the foundation that was already done through a really good grassroots process really put Global Learning for All in a really good spot. We then, that document that was created by this group was then reviewed by the Global Learning for All subcommittee. And, we started going through this and really thinking about how do we take each one of these and really what would the basis be for new targets and new goals that we could all aspire to. So what I want to do first is really, I don't want to go through what we did on all 17 of those. If you'd like that document, please email us and we'll get that out to you. But I just want to give you an idea from a few of them of what it looks like when you start to adapt this, the targets from the international level down to the campus level. So when we think about goal 2, ending hunger, et cetera, it starts to look like this, right? That you're ensuring that no SUNY student goes hungry by establishing food pantries and other mechanisms on all campus by 2020, or purchasing a minimum of 25% of sustainability and locally sourced food by 2030, things of that type of nature, right? Or if you think about goal 6, for instance, and looking at clean water, right, and the availability of that, we want to decrease potable water use consumption by 50% and half the amount of untreated wastewater discharged to campuses by 2030, right? We want to strive under number 4 to create closed-loop water systems on all SUNY campuses and a number of other targets under the goal. When you think about goal 7, something very close to the work that we're doing here at the University of Buffalo, how do we create affordable, sustainable, clean energy for all? We started to link these to existing things that the state of New York was doing as well as on other campuses. So we knew that we've made these commitments on both climate, but also in terms of our renewable energy goals. So you can see some of the ones that are listed down there, from conservation to where we're buying or what we're buying, excuse me. And also, like in number 4, working with our communities at the local level. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move past a couple of these, but I want you to know that we went through all 17 of these and really put new targets in place that we think will resonate. The flexibility piece became really important to us and the members who were working on this. We knew that each campus, there's 64 campuses in the SUNY system, we needed to provide campuses with different ways of getting there, but obtaining and hitting the same goal. And in addition to that, we also know that it couldn't really be a command control edict from SUNY Central, if you will, but really needed to be fostered at that campus level. And finally, we knew that we would need policy and tools and, yes, money in some cases to get there. So those were some key indicators for us. The second part of the strategy was then, again, if you'll remember, figuring out how do we lift up some of the work that's being done. So in those same goals, we went back through them, right? And we cited, okay, for instance, on that first one, Governor Cuomo had announced by the end of the fall of 2018 that New York State public colleges and SUNY and CUNY have access to food pantries, and all SUNY campuses are. Right? So lifting those things up, or thinking about goal 6, the work, for instance, that New Paltz and others are doing on green infrastructure and decreasing harmful algae blooms, protecting our drinking water, et cetera. So we went through all of these, and there were things that we pulled out for each of these. The commitment that SUNY has made in terms of renewable energy purchases in solar and wind space. And you can really, you can start to see some of our colleagues' eyes be like, okay, this isn't so crazy that we're never going to get there. We're actually doing a lot of this right now. And I think that was really important for us. That final part then was, okay, how do we get this to live? And so we put together a nomination process that really is about requesting, both from a grassroots and a system level, the campuses identifying the work they're doing, submitting those, and then reviewing those. And this last slide is kind of a little tongue-in-cheek, but this was the conversation I had with my colleagues, sustainability colleagues, like why would you go through this work, right? And I think that's really important, back to Todd's positioning about the why and how important that is, because the self-interest at the end of the day is really what motivates us to figure out what the prioritization piece is on all of these things. So I'll stop there, and I will, I think this was really important work that we did, but it was also really came down to, I think, organizing and planning. The work that Kristen's going to talk about is I think the piece that is just watching change agents really launch and make a difference. So I'll turn it over to you, Kristen.
Great, thank you so much, Ryan. And I do want to talk about a really extraordinary initiative to create change agents for the SDGs using the SUNY COIL Global Commons. Clearly the pandemic brought lots of folks together, and that crisis really allowed us to overcome some barriers to collaboration that might have impeded a system-wide endeavor in ordinary times. The planning and administration of the SUNY COIL Global Commons brought folks from across 11 campus as well as system administration units, which is a huge undertaking. Students who participated were from 18 different SUNY campuses. And so building this kind of program required creativity, it required extensive coordination, it required breakdown of barriers, and at a time when none of us could travel. So the result was, paradoxically, there was this extraordinary sense of purpose and meaning, so that the additional workload during a time of very heavy workload already was accommodated mostly collaboratively and without objection. It was really extraordinary. So the underlying principle of the Global Commons was to have a mutual benefit for the students who participate in the program, as well as the communities they worked with internationally. Ideally, we wanted students to learn from their engagement to develop those global learning skills while also providing a service to the communities that they were working with. Another key and very deliberate feature of the project was the decoupling of the creation of the curriculum from the facilitation of the actual courses. And this was to enable students to have flexibility so they could choose among a number of different curricular options. And it allowed the facilitators to mentor and guide the work of the students toward a higher level of understanding, rather than focusing strictly on content delivery. It was also key to the sustainability of the program because it resulted in a variety of open educational resources around the SDGs that we can use now to build future projects. So essentially, students started with a 3-credit section of intercultural storytelling for global sustainability. And within this course, students selected a media option so they could learn specifically about how stories are told through a particular medium. So narrative, podcast, video. Students were able to learn about comics, graphic novels, games, even theater. And as you can see from their quotes here, the lessons they learned were extraordinary. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. One student said, through storytelling, you do more than tell a narrative. You also give a piece of yourself to others and allow them to truly understand you. Again, one of the goals of global learning. Another said, I've definitely enjoyed every moment of discovering the world of video making through this course. It is something that I will keep with me well into the future. And again, it's that kind of skill and tool that students need as they prepare for a life post-university. After the storytelling part of the course, students moved into a 3-credit course of their choosing that focused on one of the 6 SDGs. And in these sections, students were able to choose a disciplinary lens through which they would focus their understanding of the SDG and then contextualize the impacts that the global issues have on real communities. So for example, for SDG 10, reducing inequalities, students could focus on disability and advocacy, or for SDG 3, good health and well-being, some students were able to focus on child and family mental health. In the next section, students were partnered with an NGO, and the goal was to create a project with an international NGO that they could use. You can see here the list of the NGO partners, including Friends of Brackenhurst Forest in Kenya, the Center for Creative Ecology in Israel, Hope Revival Children's Organization in Tanzania. And these NGO partners were nominated by SUNY faculty and staff who were committed to working with groups of students who would develop a project that would both tell the story of the NGO and result in a deliverable that could serve the NGO community. If you see in the next slide, these are just a handful of the projects that students developed. And if you look on our website, you can see a whole series of really creative, wonderful projects that students developed. They produced videos, newsletters, even a graphic novel. And again, the results far surpassed the expectations of the NGOs. You can see in the next slide some of the lessons that students learned. And these were open-ended testimonials from students afterwards when we asked them what they learned. You can see in the SDG that was focusing on law and health, one student said that they were able to learn the effects of systematic racism in people's daily lives. Another said they learned about the major disparities in healthcare and how healthcare privately funded to cater and benefit to those who come from affluent neighborhoods. So these, again, were just some of the lessons that students learned. And again, these are some of the lessons that we want students to learn when they have a global experience. And then finally, you can see also the impact on the faculty and on the global communities that students engaged with. And I'm going to highlight two, one from a faculty facilitator and one from an NGO representative. The faculty member said, in my 12 years of teaching, this course was the most extraordinary course I have ever taught. The combination of storytelling, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and partnering with an NGO was compelling, impactful, and so meaningful for me and I believe for my students. And then a representative of Hope Revival Children's Organization said, I'm asking you, don't stop here. Can we think of what we can do together to bring more impact and to empower women? So you can see that through this creative project, we were able to have some of the goals that you would expect from a global learning or a mobility experience in this online environment, and had impact for students, faculty, and the NGOs alike. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Todd, to talk a little bit about where we go from here.
Yeah, that's always the tricky question, right? Where do we go from here? It's quite inspiring, though, and what an inspiring start that our faculty and students across the system have given us. I think obviously as university leaders, our job, and Kristen, you know this very well, is to get beyond tactical considerations with respect to the pandemic and really think and put into action strategies for making this new reality be more responsive to the needs of our students and to continue to prepare them in new and innovative ways for the world they're entering. And I think that this example you've just run us through in the last few minutes is a wonderful example of that. We recognize that the status quo really isn't going to serve. There isn't going to be a getting back to business as usual, nor arguably should there be. Not dissimilar to what we hear after national disasters or natural disasters, we in higher education also have to build things back better than they were before. I think one of the things we learned with this particular experience has been the importance of being deliberate about incorporating meaning and purpose into student learning, and also into opportunities for staff and faculty to contribute to that learning. As Kristen alluded to, it was a fairly heavy lift for our administrators and faculty alike to build the Global Commons from scratch. They did it in just a couple of months in the middle of a pandemic, but people realized and were willing to contribute their talent and creativity because they saw the opportunity to build something better, and really saw the means by which that could be done. We do know that greater use of digital environments for teaching and learning is here to stay, and I think this is an excellent example of that. We also know that moving into remote instruction en masse has had its problems. And I think our experience as a system, and going probably well beyond the Global Commons into other experience as well, is that use of that technology and that those digital environments are really, when used at their best, they're an enhancer of the sort of interaction between faculty, students, and their communities, and I mean that in the broadest possible sense across the world, is really what can drive that modernization in a very good way. So to do all of these types of things better, we need to be thoughtful and deliberate. We need to continue to build meaningful student engagement. And the lessons we've learned through the Global Commons are helping us rethink our role in delivering student-centered online education using elements of virtual exchange. We're actually engaged in a broader effort here in SUNY to rethink about online education at scale. And I think that the models, the pedagogies that were developed in the context of the Global Commons are really going to serve us well as our universities are thinking about new and better ways to collaborate in delivering educational programs. When our sense of personal control over our circumstances was at a low for so many during the pandemic, and I know we've all felt that, providing students with purpose and agency using the SDGs and global engagement resulted in high levels of student motivation and enthusiasm. And in fact, as you can see, and as I think Kristen described very well, it had a similar effect on faculty and staff. We see this as a meaningful takeaway, and it's one that we're going to use every tool in our arsenal to build upon further in the months and years ahead. So I think I'll leave it there, and hopefully that gives us a little bit of time for response to questions and interaction.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Todd, Kristen, Ryan, of course, for this great presentation, set of presentations, and these really insightful and inspiring stories of what you have pulled together. There is one question in the Q&A box if you want to look at that, but I want to kick us off with one a little bit more broad, and anybody can take that. That might help the participants who are on this call here from the SUNY system, but also those who we've seen in the chat who come even from outside the United States and from many other universities. With the efforts that you have gone through, what were some of the logistical, bureaucratic obstacles to create this? I mean, you call it the Global Commons or this approach, and how did you overcome them? I mean, this is maybe a question to Todd and also to Kristen, but of course also to Ryan. That's number one. And then maybe for your colleagues at the SUNY campuses, is this sort of experience replicable at any of the SUNY campuses across your system? These are two questions. And then there's a third one that came from one of the participants, and I just call on the participants to please use that Q&A function. That's very specific. If you have any experience in integrating the SDGs into a quantitative course, the participant here is specifically asking for an accounting curriculum. Anything comes to mind, maybe you want to touch on that. So in no particular order, I call on you to answer these three questions. Kristen, Todd, Ryan.
Actually, why don't I jump in with a question about best practices in integrating SDGs in the quantitative courses. One of the beauties of the COIL Global Commons was the first section was on the intercultural storytelling, and then the second section really worked on how do you create a project that's of use for an NGO. I could very easily see the first 3 credits focusing on perhaps a more technical skill. accounting in a global context, and then using those skills to provide a service that's clearly of benefit for an NGO. So that seems to me to be the model. Would work in business, accounting, engineering, all manner of technical courses, as well as the storytelling course, the intercultural storytelling course that we develop here at SUNY.
Yeah, Kristen, I think that's good. And you know, so I'm going to give you a very engineering answer based on my faculty background. You probably could have almost guessed that of me, but I think the key here, applied learning is huge in all of these areas. And so putting that in an engineering context, we're oftentimes not very good in the profession at teaching students how to translate those equations and technical concepts and laboratory experiences they have into things that can help people and can fit a specification or help a community. And you know, so the engineering education community in general has had a big push the last few years in trying to do that a little bit more intentionally. And I think so if you take design and you take the aspect of the Global Commons you mentioned, which was the in-depth engagement with stakeholders around the world, I think that's really key to kind of driving the sort of applied learning that students can do in a context like this. At least that's my thought.
Yeah, and I was just going to add in really to piggyback on both of your great points. I think it's, you know, if you can, on that accounting question, if you can ground it in a sense of purpose and then you can leverage the experiential, and there's two examples that I would say that I've seen. One is like pricing carbon, right? That is a huge accounting process essentially. But it doesn't have to just stay in the accounting wheelhouse, right? It can also be leveraged with a bunch of other disciplines, et cetera. One of the ways we've done that, we have a great faculty member here at UB who started a course called the Carbon Reduction Challenge off of what was actually modeling off of Georgia Tech. And essentially, the students worked with businesses to find ways to reduce the overall amount of carbon. That was basically an accounting exercise in one sense, but it involved a lot of other things like Kristen had just talked about with the storytelling and networking and other pieces. So I think bringing that together in that package is the way to really leverage that and get it out front.
So Jonas, one of the questions you alluded to had to do with obstacles in doing this kind of development. So just sort of changing course a little bit. One that occurs to me that we were very well positioned to respond to is just a resource challenge, right? On one hand, we had faculty who were passionate about doing this and students that wanted to participate, but those details of how the resources for the course get developed, how are they disseminated, where does the expertise lie to help faculty do that? And we had an equity agenda here. So that kind of led us in the direction of OER. We have a very large open educational resources effort here in the system. Some funds available under that effort to help pay for efforts such as this. And so I think it was an example where we were able to do the right thing. We were able to get the support, you know, in the hands and at the disposal of the faculty who wanted to do this. But then the product was something that could be reused and could be reused cheaply or freely by others. And I think when we think about efforts like this, that's really important, right? Not only from the student's accessibility standpoint, but also the scalability of these sorts of educational efforts. And so we're still working on that, but I think that's an important challenge to think about when one does something like this.
Great, thanks. Thanks for addressing all questions here. We have one more question here, also a specific one. Maybe you want to see that in the Q&A function. If any of you feels equipped to answer that, how do you cope with hands-on challenge-based e-learning? Maybe you want to stress that e-learning part that you have also become so familiar with. And I also want to remind everybody we have about a minute left, so we have to be very quick, and you maybe also want to make some final comments now.
Good. I can make a quick comment on hands-on challenge-based e-learning. Potsdam is known for its arts and its music, and I have to say the creativity of faculty in developing virtual approaches to things they normally do hands-on is extraordinary. So they've created all kinds of online studios. So when in doubt, I would just recommend we ask faculty to use their extraordinary creativity, and they found ways to have dance online, art online, and even music instruction online in ways that were extraordinary. A little harder for engineering, but at least for the arts, we were able to figure some things out.
Excellent. Any closing words, Todd, Ryan, before we close the session?
No, for me, it's just hopefully I did justice to it in my comments. The depth of admiration I have for the faculty and the campuses that put this together and did so in such an innovative and cheerful and optimistic way. It's really made me proud to be associated with the system. So it's just a fantastic effort and inspirational to be involved with.
Excellent, thank you. Ryan?
I think the only other piece that I would just add is these initiatives don't happen without leadership at the top, and the leadership that Todd and the provost and President Ertzberg have put out there has enabled, I think, a lot of great staff, students, and faculty to be able to thrive in what has otherwise been a rather challenging past 7-8 months. So I'm a big fan of Rahm Emanuel's advice: never let a crisis go to waste. And I think that we've been able to at least start that process.
And I want to add, I would like to just add a huge shout out to Sally Crimmins-Villela and the international affairs folks at SUNY, whose passion and dedication to the SDGs, to sustainable development, and to internationalization are unparalleled. I've never been prouder to be a part of SUNY than through this project. So huge shout out to all of the folks within SUNY who worked really hard to make this happen.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you very much to all of you, to everybody who was listening in, and of course, I mean, people who have made this session here possible. It was really inspiring to hear from all of you. I wish you great success. And with that, we're going back to the final session. And if you are on your chat, you can see the link that our colleague from Georgia Tech, Drew, had included here in the chat function. So please either go onto that link or go back into the Eventbrite agenda to join us for the final 30 minutes where we close off the session, and we will be back in the main room now. So with that, thank you again to all of you panelists, to everybody who listened in here, and everybody who made this session possible. It was a great pleasure to be here with you. Thanks so much.